right, we're rolling. What's going on, Mike Piacentini?
What's going on,
Welcome
Rich
back.
Sony?
I mean, it's going. There's a lot going on, but
There is.
it's all good. How about you?
I can't complain. Staying busy. Pandemic's over. I think the last time we talked, we were like in the knee deep of it. And so, now I'm
Yeah,
back at the studio all the time. So, it's a change of pace, but, doing what I like to do. So I can't complain too much.
that's what I like about doing the podcast because it's like a little time capsule.
I did go
But
back and
yeah,
like listen to the old one, and I was like, oh shit, like we were really like, I was really justifying, like and saying all these things about like how it's just totally cool that I'm making records and headphones, and it's still, I did bring along a lot of that like sort of like minimalist production standpoint into like my day to day now. Whereas beforehand, I'd be like, you can't make a record on headphones, and now I'm like, no, you definitely can, and um, you know, there's pros and cons to everything, but it definitely made me a lot more flexible in the way that I approach record production.
sure. I mean, I'm really interested in that just in general. Like, what have you taken? So the headphones is one thing, right? That's something you've kind of taken back with you as an option. What was something that was really an eye opener that you were like, I can't believe I was doing things this way before?
I think the biggest thing was like shittier like A to D converters and stuff. Like I had a good D to A, or no, I had a good A to D, but not the best D to A. I was just using like a Focusrite, and now I could take that out of the chain. And I'm like, oh, that's why people aren't doing kind of final pass mastering on that. It's a lot of stuff where you're like, you realize real quick, when you're shooting out like kind of compact gear versus professional grade, like rack mounted stuff, why you're not using that in a kind of actual environment. But, it, it the one benefit to being back in the studio is I'm just making records quicker now. Like I think I told you
Mm,
the last time we were doing this that like I was, and this is true, I was constantly like going down to my car and like listening to shit in there and like making sure it sounded good on like, multiple sound systems. And I set up a whole like surround sound system in my living room over here where I had like the sound bar and like some rears and heights, and I don't have to do that anymore. I just have a room that sounds good. So I don't have to like, bring records I do into three different environments to try to make sure that they sound rad across the board.
sure. And that consistency is the most important thing that you were even mentioning, right? And that was something hard, like the headphones versus speakers. I'm sure it's nice just to have those consistent rooms, and especially like when you're saying like a bar, like the surround stuff, I'm sure makes a huge difference just having the right monitoring setup.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff is all like, especially with the Dolby Atmos stuff, and it's kind of like object based um, mixing as opposed to channel based mixing. So there's no like right or wrong speaker configuration. You can kind of just like add or subtract speakers based on how many you have available or can afford. And, you know, listening in an environment where we have a intelligently designed amount of speakers with correct phase cancellation is a big deal versus like, oh shit, I'm just going to go throw like 10 speakers and a sound bar in my living room and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Do you wish that you could go back and redo anything? Like, do you listen back to stuff now and you can tell that you were doing it at home?
I mean, that's tough, right? Like I feel like anybody can say that about any record, right? Like I can go back and say, I wish I did things differently on hundreds of records I've done. Um, but at the end of the day, you have to commit at some point and say this record is done. And when you and the artist and the producer and the record label all sign off on the record, you know, you're hoping that you gave, the best product you can. And for the most part, I think I did. I really did do my due diligence during COVID. It was just a little bit of a longer process for me because I was constantly comparing shit to, constantly A-Bing things to other records in different environments to make sure I was kind of like dotting my I's and crossing my T's. And now I'm just like, no, this room sounds good now. I know it sounds good and I don't have to, worry about whether or not it's going to stack up.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes total sense. That you just have that confidence to execute. That reminds me of like in coding when you're writing code without tests or with tests. Like if you have tests that are broken, that'll break for you. You have the confidence to just change something in a day or whatever. But when you're not, you have to go back and check it exactly like you're saying. You have to actually test the website instead of having it automated. There's just more things. I'd imagine even being home too, like you have people that can help make sure that everything's configured in the office as opposed to at home. Like you're setting up that surround sound thing just like by yourself, I'd
Yeah.
imagine, right?
And, look, there's a lot of things that like, you know, I like about the work from home environment. Like I like, there's certain parts of my job specifically where I'm like, the record's done and I'm just making deliverables or I'm doing QC work on stuff that is done, or I'm taking like ticks and pops and shit out in RX editor. I can do that anywhere on a laptop and, in headphones. And there is absolutely no quality differential between those two processes. It's just, you know, there's a lot of convenience there. But I think for the heavy lifting, I do appreciate having a proper room and, the support staff and stuff like that. Like I like having our senior technician, oh shit, Dom, come in here. The converter just stopped working, or, is the tweeter on that speaker blown? Because it sounds like it is, and you should replace that. Those are things I can't, or I can do at home, but it's like it takes time. Like a speaker gets blown at my house, I got to order a part from Amazon or Sweetwater or whatever, and wait 3 days and then replace it myself, and it's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, no. I get it. Those are the issues I run into recording at home by myself, especially using the same mixer and setup for the podcast and for doing music. Like we were talking about the SM7B. Like I'm ready, I'm in the mood, ready to like track my vocals, and then like I'm getting a hum thing or like my guitar. I use a snake that goes from the back of my mixer down onto the floor so I don't have to reach back there all the time. And I have Phantom going to my condenser mic, and for some reason the snake I bought like doesn't shield out the Phantom for their combo jacks. So when I plug my guitar in, I got like this crazy hum for like a whole long time, and I couldn't figure out why. I even replaced the pickups on my guitar. I like bought new pickups and put them in.
And that's tough too. When you're in the mood to record and like you have to then troubleshoot, like
Yeah.
it's hard to get out of that like I'm gonna be an artist mindset and go back into I'm gonna be an engineer mindset and start fucking
Mm-hmm.
troubleshooting every little okay, let's try taking out this cable and replacing it with this cable. Did that fix it? No, okay, let's try, muting this speaker and plugging in this speaker and see did that fix it? No, okay. And it's a constant process of elimination to fix problems like that. And, you know, doing it on your own while you're also trying to be creative is very difficult.
Exactly. The switching between artist and engineer, especially when I'm like my work day is all engineering, right? So like I don't want to put that hat back on at night. Like
No.
I do to some degree, I guess, because like I'm doing it. I'm not going to the studio, but anyway, yeah. We were talking about you said you had some stuff to say. I was saying one of the problems I face is knowing when things are done, right? Not having being the producer and the creative at the same time. Being the engineer and the creative is hard, but being the producer as well, knowing when a take was good or not, is pretty
Yeah.
difficult. And I was saying one of the tricks I was using is with an intricate like lead guitar part was trying to get a perfect double for all like the solo and everything. And that's how I knew it was done, right? Like it's like as long as they match up, I'm cool if I got through it. Um yeah, that seemed to be effective this time. We'll see how it comes out in the end of the song, but so far I like it.
Yeah, I mean, a big thing I've been doing, with leads, especially in like the genre of music that I play when I'm doing my artist hat on, is like if I'm doing like an octave chord lead, I'm like picking out the individual notes now. So I'll do the root and the eighth separately so that it comes out cleaner in the recording. Which
Mm.
when you're playing live, you can't do that, but for the recording, it just comes out cleaner. But yeah, it's like we just went in and did a whole full length record, and I refuse to do the engineering, or at least the tracking and the mixing. Even though I could, but I don't have any desire to, and it would probably come out worse than if I did it through proper methods where I hired a producer and a mixing engineer that can come in, sort of agnostic to the whole thing and give their opinions. And yeah, it's just easier to have somebody be like, no dude, this is done, you don't have to fuck with it anymore, rather than sitting there and being like, okay, no, I'm the engineer, so like I can fuck with this part and that's better, right? And you go through that process so many times, eventually it doesn't get any better. You hit like this plateau where you're just like fucking with shit for the sake of it, and you're not making the song any better. At a certain point, you just kind of get to, you know in this like looped mindset where you're just fixing things that don't need to be fixed because you're so intricately ingrained in the song itself, and you can't pull back and look at it from a macro standpoint, kind of thing.
Sure. And that's interesting to hear even from your perspective, right? Because that's typically your job in general, right? Is to come in with that macro eye for a whole project. But even you need it. So, you know, I'm really dancing with the devil there.
I mean, on like mastering and stuff like that, I can be objective to my own stuff, but with mixing and tracking and producing, I don't think I can be very objective.
I get you. I mean, especially when I go back and listen to my stuff, right? Because I've done it all myself, right? So my first like four chapters were very, very raw, and like I was writing music so fast that I didn't care. And then the fifth one I did as an experiment. That's the one I sent you to help me master that one song that I pushed it way too far. I was just trying to record with a field recorder and get the best take. And then the last thing I put together, like the last album I had, I was happy with. Maybe it needed to be mixed. Now I'm like, all right, maybe I need somebody else to mix it. But like moving through that, it's tricky approaching it and wanting to add more things
Yeah.
than just when it's just acoustic guitar, it's fine, right? But when you have to add a bass part, you have to be creative for every single thing too, right? Like if you're doing everything, well, if I'm doing everything myself, it's a lot of work.
And it's real easy to like snowball it too. It's real easy to go in and be like, oh, okay, cool. I added bass. All right, I got to play drums. Why not add some percussion? Why not add some shakers and tambourines? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds fuller. Let's add some synth. And then you go back and you're like, okay, now we got to add 22 vocal layers to match all the other parts that are now full. And it just turns into this, constant chasing your tail kind of thing.
How do you guys combat that? Because you still have that in the studio, right? Like when Northvale goes, I'm sure that still comes up, especially when somebody else is doing the work for you.
Yeah, I mean, we come in with like pretty. I mean, we just did our first full length, so like up until now, we kind of like paused at the end of like 2020, even mid 2023. I think we stopped putting music out, and we're like, okay, let's this singles and everything, that game that everybody plays where you put out like individual singles every month or two. Like we couldn't keep up with it anymore. Like one of the guys in the band had a kid, and it just became very challenging to like keep up with that momentum of like, okay, we're going to go back into the studio every like 8 weeks and record a new song. We were like, no, let's do it like, I don't want to say old school, but kind of old school, right? Well, let's do a whole album. And then we have 10 or 11 songs in the bank that we can then trickle out the same way you would do the singles that everybody does, where you release a song every 6 weeks or whatever with a full PR and social media campaign, and that's kind of how it, that's what Spotify recommends. That's what, you know, all these playlist editors recommend, and that's the game right now. It's like, you got to drop a song every 6 to 8 weeks, but we're like, okay, what if you just do an album and then pick 4 or 5 singles off of it and just do that way? That gives you more leeway. And so, we went back in and kind of sat down, and like, we had 18 pre-pro demos going in, and they were pretty fleshed out. And we sent them to the producer that we use. We use this guy, Brett Ramnez, who's like um, he's done a couple like pretty big records in that kind of like pop punk alternative scene. Now he was the drummer of this band, The Movie Life, and he fucking killed it. We just got back the first pass of mixes last week, and I just sent him notes now, so we're going through and tweaking all that shit.
Did you do all 18? Did you record all
No,
18?
we did. So we sent him all of them, and then we got to the studio and we're like, okay, let's whittle this down to like 10 or 11, because that's 18's egregious, and
Yeah,
also we didn't have
that's
that much
what.
time. It's
Yeah,
we kind of went in, and I think it took us. We did drums. It was nuts. We had the whole Barbershop Studios, which is this studio out in like West Jersey, um, over in Lake Hopatcong, and that's kind of like Brett's home base. So he was tracking drums upstairs. When he was done doing drums, he would send the session to his other engineer, this guy Gary, who's an incredible fucking engineer. He's got his own studio down in South Jersey called Sound Acres, and he would be in another room tracking guitars, and we kind of just churned it through as efficiently as we could once we had everything like locked into place. Once we were like, okay, these are the pre-pros we want to focus on. And then Brett kind of like ripped them all apart and was like, okay, let's just play this through with like one electric guitar and vocals of the scratch track, or one acoustic guitar and vocals of the scratch track, and then we'd do drums to that. And it was hands down the most efficient recording process I've ever been a part of. It was very like, dude was had his assistant like editing drums while we were tracking guitar. It was nuts.
dude, that's awesome. Like, I'm it's reminding me of I'm reading Elon Musk's biography right now. I'm listening to it, and he is always talking about how um the execution is harder than the prototype, right? And it's like exactly like you're talking here. Like executing on that stuff is like having everything worked out like that is awesome. It's like he has like a recording factory, you know?
Yeah. And that's tough. It's tough to go in with like, how do you make it a cohesive kind of body of work while and still call it an album, while keeping in mind that you're going to play this singles kind of like release planning game in the background kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. I've uh I've been thinking a lot about this actually because I have 4 tracks that are like almost done. So as I finish this last one, which I realized I wanted to retrack the vocals today because they're too slow. So my thing with what I've realized recently is I like tracking much more than I like editing. And if I'm at home, I have the luxury of just comping, and like I'll just do like 25 takes, 30 takes, and then just comp it, and I don't edit. Like, and if I want to redo it again, like I did, maybe like one day of vocal tracking back in the beginning, like right after the scratch of everything was done, but like nothing was locked into like a pocket yet, right? So the vocals are a little all over the place, and I'm like, do I want to go in and like adjust it all night? Nah, I'd rather sing, you know?
And that's
Like,
nobody wants to talk about that like editing is not fun. I don't care who you are.
yeah,
I don't care what kind of engineer you are. I don't care how into music you are. Editing sucks. You got to sit down and you got to like lock everything to a grid and like edit all your fucking drums, auto tune all your vocals, sample your kick and snare, reamp your guitars. None of that's fun. it's actively not fun. And then you listen to these like big. I think we might have talked about this in the last podcast, but like I was listening to this one like big engineer talk, this like big mixing engineer, and he's like, "Yeah, I mix a song in like 4 hours," and I'm like, "No, you don't, dude. You mix a song in 4 hours because your assistants came in and made sure everything was fucking perfect before you sat down at the board." Before you start EQing anything or like moving levels, everything is in its fucking place. You've got, 20 fucking stacks of vocals all auto tuned. Your drums are sampled perfect. Your synths are reamped. And everything sounds great. And you're just adjusting levels. Then, sure, yeah, you can mix a song in 4 hours. But there was 40 hours of work that happened before you sat down.
Oh, totally. And it's critical for your style of music much more than mine. I think mine, if there's anything about it that's consistent, is it's like homemade. Like, and the genres I listen to have that, right? Like my like references for my last song I put out were like Misfits songs on purpose, right? But it's still that 40 hours worth of work. I think the same thing, because during that time I was watching a lot of like mixing with the masters. I love watching those just like in the background, honestly. And yeah, like for me too, because I'm setting up my own stuff at home, like every time they come in with like, they're like on like a big like SSL, like, you know, whole thing. And I'm like, yeah, all right. So you have like your 40 tracks set up. Like, how'd you do that though? Like, I want to know that. Like, how did you set up all of that thing? Like, I can figure out how to do the faders and like,
Well, I think, and
you
that's
know,
where a lot of this, like, going back to like home recording versus studio recording stuff, like the technology is definitely there now where a lot of the things that we use to make records, in the past, you used to, okay, like I just did a Rage Against the Machine record from scratch, right? Like there were no stems. I mixed it in Atmos, but I had to remix every song in stereo first to create the stems. Luckily, I had the track sheets, and the track sheets were incredibly detailed. So they were like, okay, on the vocal chain, it's an 1176 dBx through a Neve 1073 through a whatever reverb, I forget off the top of my head. But it was like, okay, there's Zach's vocal chain. We can dial this in now. I'll pull that shit up in UAD and I'll get close. And I don't have to try that hard. But like back in the day, you had to have those physical pieces of gear and you had to have 10 of them because they ran everything through an 1176. And if you didn't have a fucking stack of DBX compressors, you couldn't do this sound. You just couldn't. But now I'm sitting here with my UAD satellite box and I can dump that shit on every track if I want to. And I'm 90% of the way there just by like dialing in a compressor kind of off the cuff.
I've been like fantasizing a little about getting a UAD set up recently for that reason. I just like the idea of that being having all that at your fingertips, but also that you get to use all of those like the channel strip plugins, like those like Black Magic, just using some vintage emulation over just like stacking some isotope stuff or whatever. Like the EQ specifically. Like I realized especially for my kind of music, right? Like if I'm listening to like again, like a Misfits track or even something like a little more polished, like a Led Zeppelin track, right?
The thing with the Misfit stuff though is like the Misfit stuff, yeah, it sounds raw, but they like did it right? Like they weren't just like they hired good engineers to do the records. They weren't
Oh
just
yeah.
shooting from the fucking hip and
No.
you know. So like they're also doing the same thing I'm just talking about. Like they're going through these signal chains that up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago were not really affordable to the general public.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, even with my Tascam though, right? Like I'm like, why? Like I switched it to start recording from the channel strip. Like before that, I was like, why would I do that? I just want the raw, like, Like I'll do it. I'll have it on my sub on my monitor, EQ'd, but and compressed and with reverb and everything. But now I just print right with it for the sake. I just am gonna commit to it. Like if I hear it right now, let's just commit to it right here. You know?
A lot of like kids that are learning from YouTube tutorials, and there's nothing wrong with learning from like YouTube tutorials. It's just pick the
Mm-hmm.
right ones. You know, don't listen to some guy who's sitting there who hasn't ever really made a record, who is just more popular on Instagram reels and TikTok reels than he is at making actual music. But a lot of them don't tell you to EQ and compress on the way in, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
because you have to commit to that shit while you're tracking. And that's, you know, I saw this guy Brett doing it when we were doing the Northvale record. Like, he's committing to processes from a raw signal before they even get to the computer. And that's, I think, a hard concept for a lot of people who don't know what they're doing to grasp, because you're now fucking with the clean signal, right? Like it's coming in affected. And it goes against some of the other recording, you know, kind of basics that they tell you to do, like take a DI signal, you know, stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. It's like, just in case, take a DI signal. Okay, just in case, have the drummer hit the snare drum and the kick drum in isolation so you can sample that later. Um, but that's a big part of why a lot of the records we like sound the way they like, because the engineer commits before it even goes into the computer or on the tape or whatever the hell you're doing.
Sure. Have you ever? I don't know if they fall into your like bands that you listen to for pleasure, but I've been getting really into the bands that Steve Albini recorded and just his mixing in general. I realized that a lot of records that I like the bands, sure, but I also like the mixing techniques he used. But then as I started to study his philosophy, I've really jived with it, and it's actually influenced my approach to music and other things as well.
His approach is very interesting to me, both from like a financial standpoint, because he famously will not take points on records. He just wants to be paid to do a record, which I respect the shit out of that. But like, a lot of dudes made livings by taking, you know, points on a record. You know, there's this one guy at Sony that used to work here with us, not with me personally, but with like other engineers there back in like the early 2000s, and he got points on a Christina Aguilera record on like Genie in a Bottle specifically. The guy retired
Yeah,
to LA. He's just in a mansion in LA. He doesn't make records anymore. Maybe he does for fun, but like not professionally, and that's it. He's out. He doesn't care. And so it's, I do like Albini's approach in that he's, you know, he believes that he's doing a job and he should be paid for that job and nothing more in perpetuity. That's fucking respectable. Is it, you know, the way the world works? Maybe not, but I respect it. And then, yeah, the engineering philosophy kind of trickles down from there, right? It's very much like, that dude must have zero imposter syndrome. He must just know what he's going to do every time he goes into a room and fully trusts in himself, because he doesn't really fuck with things, right? He just kind of, what comes in is what, you know, he knows it's going to sound good coming in, so he knows it's going to sound good going out. And, you know, I bet you his mix sessions aren't all that complex because he does things right the whole way through.
sure. And specifically, that's a perfect segue to the point I was going to make, which was related to what we were talking about before, right? Like in the one, if anyone wants to look it up, it's on his mixing with the masters. Actually, I was really happy to find that he had one of those. I was watching a bunch of his stuff on YouTube recently because I got back. The Pixies are my favorite band, by the way, probably of all time.
Oh, I can't
I've
wait to
seen
go to
them a
that
lot.
tour with fucking Modest Mouse this summer. That's gonna
Are
be,
you going?
oh yeah,
You're gonna go?
yeah.
Oh, let's talk about dates because I want to go.
Modest Mouse is one of
Yeah,
my favorites, so I want to go to that
hell
tour.
yeah.
Yeah.
The Pixies, it's their last tour. I don't know if we'll be able to see her play again or not.
Who's the headliner?
I think they share it like they
Yeah,
did with Brand New. They
they're
might
billing it
switch
as like
back
a
and forth.
co-headlining tour, but I don't know who's the
Yeah,
actual like. I guess you won't know until that night because they're probably gonna like trade off.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's the last tour with Paz. I don't know how to say her last name. It's like Paz Lekitin, I think. But she's a dope bassist. She played bass for in a Perfect Circle for a while, and then she
Oh, that's
played
sick.
in Zwan. You know the band
I don't know
Zwan
that
that
band
has
though.
like it had Billy Corgan. It was like a super group, and they got her to play bass, and I really liked the work she was doing with them. She's the only one I've seen perform with the Pixies on bass, and I thought she did a great job. And I guess the new person they have is from Band of Skulls, who I've never gotten into, but
I
they
don't know
seem
there.
cool.
And I forget who the support was, but it looked good too. So
Cat Power, who I've never gotten deep into, but reputable. Um, yeah, Steve Albini. He. So one thing back to what we were talking about with the mixing with the DI, he had said something in that master class on mixing with the masters where he was like, "This is how I track bass, right?" And he does it for each instrument. So that one's about tracking. So he's telling you how he would track different, whatever instruments. And for bass, he's going through the setup and he's like, I always put the bass through this one compressor and he only records to tape, right? That's his thing. And he's like, you can't put bass onto tape without a compressor because the way the waves print onto the tape is too inconsistent or whatever. Like the bass strings have too many inconsistencies. And if you're printing onto tape, you can never get that fidelity back, right? And I was like, holy shit, that makes sense to me. I never thought about like needing to do effects before you put it into the system at all in that way. But that erased exactly what we were talking about, where it's like you could always go back and reamp it. It's like maybe you can't. Maybe you just want to get it right the first time, you know?
yeah, there is something to be said too about like a good performance being done correctly the first time. Like, sometimes, and I know it's like hard to like, especially coming from a world where like you just program drums and you just program synths and it's all just MIDI and who gives a shit about the level of the performance. But there is something to be said about like a good performance because everybody in the room is fucking like keyed into, you know, or vibing on whatever song they're doing at that point in time. And, you know, you can't get that back later if you're going to go back in and like overdub it. Maybe you can, but like, why if you can do it right the first time kind of thing.
Sure, and nobody aesthetically cares, right? That's what I was talking about with my record, like where I was basically like, I'm gonna just push these things as far as I can. I have 12 songs. Let's get them done myself, release them myself. But then after that, I'm not doing this nonsense as much anymore. I want to take all of my best songs, and dude, I have like 90 now. So I'm gonna be
Holy
like,
shit.
let me take 12 and make a band with them, like
Yeah.
Dylan, right? Like say like, all right, let's do like the Rich Sony Blues Band because I probably have 12 blues songs, and let's just let it rip with those. Play live a few times, and then go to the studio and see if we could record those songs live that way and just make a moment out of it.
Yeah.
But that's very old school.
Yeah.
That's not new school at all.
No,
But I kind of dig
nobody's,
it.
very few people are doing records where it's like everybody stands in a room and plays the songs at this point.
No, 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 they don't, right? But I like that. I think that there's a danger to it,
There is a lot of
like
danger to it,
yeah,
especially like back in the day. You think about like how much virgin tape costs, and you're like, holy shit, they're paying, you know, if you want to use fresh tape, that's, today it's $120 a reel. So I don't, it was probably a little cheaper back then, but like you're really just paying like a, you know, $4 a minute. And if it fucking, and that's just in runtime of the medium you're recording onto. And, you know, if you fuck up and you still want to go onto virgin tape, time to buy another reel.
yeah. I'm really pushing down this path right now. We'll talk about other stuff too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You did a couple cool live masters that I was looking at. I'm trying to remember which ones. I was looking at your Discogs a while ago. I feel like one of them, I don't know, but you've done it doesn't matter, right? Like you've done a decent amount of live masters too. And as I've grown as a critical listener to music, I've really started to appreciate live music for that live recording for that reason. Right? There's a danger and there's like a magic to it that you don't always hear on records, and I used to not appreciate it. I used to be like only studio version guy. Have you started to appreciate live after listening to that stuff, or are you still?
So I might just I'm still very much in the studio mindset, and that very well may be because I just know too much of how like the sausage is made kind of thing. And like none of the live recordings that you probably, well, maybe some that you listen to, because you listen to a lot of bands that are like very raw and use raw as like kind of their personality. But 80 to 90% of live albums are all fucking overdubbed later. And I just,
No, no. Well, I know. I've learned this as well, and that's what's made me kind of appreciate it now, right? Because
yeah.
it's like a way of doing a scratch track with an audience in a way, you
And
know?
so for me, the only live albums I really like is when I'm like a super fan of the band, right? And then you're really just getting, because a lot of bands play, or a lot of artists in general play songs differently live than they do on the studio recording. So it's kind of like an alternate take, and that kind of interests me, if I really give a shit about the band, right? If it's just another, you know, if it's somebody I listen to kind of tangentially, I'm never going to grab for the live recording.
Interesting. Yeah, see, I've started to switch because I say I had the same perspective, and it slowly grew where I listened to more and more of these live alternate takes over time for different bands. And now I will. I'll probably listen to studio stuff a couple times and then just be like, "All right, let's see what this sounds like live."
I mean, some of them are huge, right? Like, like Cheap Trick. Look at Cheap Trick. Their biggest record is a live album. Just,
Yeah,
but that was
that's
done in,
that's one like I mean, like something like that, right? Like where you might dismiss them listening to their albums. Might be like, "Nah, they're just okay."
yeah.
But the live album is really fucking good, you know?
Yeah, and it kind of rolls back to what we were talking about before. Like some bands on the studio albums are just kind of whatever, but then they show you some kind of level of energy on their live albums that you didn't even know that they could have, because the music doesn't really lend itself to that. But when they're in a room full of 1,000 people who love their shit so much, it kind of flips a switch where they, will play the songs at a faster tempo, significantly more aggressively than they would on the record, and changes the whole vibe of the song.
Who do you think is pushing the envelope in terms of studio work these days? Who really knocks your socks off in terms of like their ability to be creative with what they have?
Oh man, I mean, I like anybody who like brings that, like, I mean, and this is my opinion, and I guarantee you most casual listeners aren't going to give a shit as much as I do, but I really like the whole like use the studio as an instrument kind of mentality. Like, and I try to approach it the same way when I go in as an artist, right? Like, I am totally cool with the fact that I might not be able to play some of the things I do in the studio live. Totally cool with that. And that's a mentality that I understand a lot of people don't get on board with. But for me, I'm like, it's fun to me to like sit there and like try shit out and like try, fuck it, let's push my guitar through this lexicon reverb. That's silly. You would never do that live. But why not? Let's put my guitar through a plate reverb into a fucking brigade chorus and see what happens. And it might sound rad. And can I play that live? Absolutely not. But so I like any bands that kind of I did a lot of work on that Modest Mouse 20th anniversary edition, and they kind of I had all the fucking multi tracks in front of me, and it was astounding to me how much like studio processing went into just trying to make those guitar tones work in the context of every song. And I am sure when Isaac has to go back and play those songs live, he has to do a fucking pedal dance to make it happen. Or he's got, a ton of like Axe Effect presets, because every song had a different guitar tone. And it was just, very much like, let's go in and see what toys we can play with today. And there's a lot of bands, or a lot of artists, and I mean, you look at like Billie Eilish, like that's kind of her thing, or at least that's her brother's thing. He goes in and sits down on a laptop and will fuck with things to the nth degree just to make them interesting, and that's cool to me.
Same. That's why I was asking it. I think that's for the record, that's why I am asking you in this venue, right? Like because I know that you have a nuanced perspective on it, so I'm curious to hear how you're evaluating quality from a
Yeah, I don't know if I'm evaluating
perspective,
quality, or
right?
if it's just
Or
what I want to listen to. You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
what I mean.
yeah,
Yeah. Like I mean, what is it? Is it qualitative is measurable, but quantitative isn't? I forget the two.
yeah,
But
one of them.
whatever. I'm asking which one your preferences
Yeah,
lie
yeah,
in,
yeah.
because yeah, I dig that too. I always admired Radiohead for that
Yeah.
reason, because they're able to translate it pretty well. And I always wondered, even with like Kid A, for example, it's like they were making that shit back in the 90s with all of this outboard like mod synth stuff. And it's like, how did they ever, like, I guess they had to write it all down because they're like reproducing it live. And it seems like it's hard to kind of be creative and then also know how to go back and do that again.
I feel like with a band like Radiohead, like, how I was just saying, it would be ridiculous to fucking play your guitar through a
Yeah,
Lexicon 480. I feel like for
they
them, it
do.
wouldn't be. Like, they could just
No.
go buy that, and that makes total sense for Radiohead. Like, you listen to how affected Tom's vocals are on pretty much every record since OK Computer, and it's like, good luck trying to fucking do that live without an intense amount of fucking processing on your shit.
Sure. But just watching how, exactly like you're saying, with all those pedals and like the rack gear that they have to manage, it's like a whole different thing. You're not just playing guitar at that
No,
point,
no, not at all. Dude, we're not even playing guitar in these, like, I mean, we are, but we're not playing guitar like just straight through. And like almost every band, unless you're just in a bar, doing covers or something, almost any band who's at least a little serious at this point is playing everything through, some sort of processing unit with the drummer running, a backing track pad, because that's the only way to do it to make your shit sound full. There's just, if you want to be competitive with everybody else, and that the price of that kind of stuff has come so far down now, where it's everybody can go buy a Roland pad through a Behringer X32 and have a full in-ear monitor backing track rig for like $2,000. So like, why, if you're in a band with 5 dudes, okay, everybody give me $400. Let's go. We're going to make our live show sound 200% better.
Sure. What is your guitar rig for your live stuff?
My guitar rig right now, I'm still doing, I want to buy a Kemper. That's my next purchase. Right now, I'm still playing through my amp, but I have a pretty significant pedal board, and then I also go into the Behringer X32 rack unit, DI, and affect it with just presets that I have programmed in there. So like, I'm like, okay, we're playing this song, and then the drummer hits the pad and that song gets queued up, and then my effects get loaded in, and it's like, okay, Mike's going through this reverb, Keith is getting his vocal compressed through this, and I literally give the front of house guy a snake, and I just go, don't mic me, We're all going pretty. I mean, you can mic like a couple like mic the vocals but I'm taking them into my unit first, and here's that vocal mic, and here's this guitar mic, and here's the kick drum mic, and I literally just I hand them a fucking 12 channel snake, and I go put that into your console.
Nice. That's pretty cool. That is not what I was doing on my solo shows at all,
No, and
but
it's
it's a
like
different beast.
it's fucking silly to say that still as like a not gigantic band, right? Like, you know, everybody all the way down has to do that to be competitive. Like, you have to be playing through. I mean, I guess you don't have to be if you're in certain genres and certain scenes, but at least in the scene that
Yeah.
I exist in, and if you're doing pop music, country music, hip hop, pretty much any popular music genre, you have to be doing this to be.
To match the expectations. No, I mean I was gonna say I haven't been playing long shows since before COVID, but right at the end I even started to I have one of those Boss VE8 units that lets you do the same thing just for a solo person. Right, so you could go in and program every song, you can change the reverb, apply different effects, and I do that at home.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out like can I pull this off alone? Right? Because it's nice when the drummer can like go through and do it, but like to remember what each song's number matches up to on this pedal, maybe the Boss VE8 is just not, it's maybe too like simplistic to do that too, but it was just like, all right, I have like 50 songs I need to program in here. Like
Oh, see,
I
the
can't.
rolling drum pad is great because you could put in like it'll load it in as tracks, and you're like, okay, track one, but you could also name it. So you could be like, okay,
Oh yeah, that's
track
awesome.
one, we're playing this. And even if he fucks up and like clicks the thing too many times with his stick, and he's still, oh, that's not the track we're playing. So
He
back.
could go back.
Yeah.
I want to look into this. I don't need the drum pad one, but I just need something where I can like name the stuff because yeah, for vocals it's pretty critical too. If you want to apply different reverbs, that's the main thing for me. Is like different songs have different reverb footprints. You want them more wet or dry.
And I think that's one of the big things that came out of COVID, because before COVID, nobody was doing it to the extent that they're doing it now. But I think when everybody had the time to sit at home and were like, how can we make our live show better when it comes back? And they just really sat down and like dug in on a lot of these like backtracking processing units. And it's kind of nuts the amount of, you know, things you can do while still playing your instrument, not like faking it, not you're not lip syncing or anything. You're still playing your shit, but like, everything will just, like I pipe in everything we're not playing. Like, I don't, there's no tambourine on stage. There's no fucking, there's no fourth guitar. There's no, there's no,
Mm-hmm.
synth bass. There's no 808 drop, but I have it all in there. And like, if you listen to the backing track thing that I load into the rolling pad, and that's like another stereo XLR I give the guy in front of house. I'm like, this is the Roland, this is the backing tracks. It's silly. It's like high harmony ad libs, shakers, and bass drops, and it's, but it makes the
How
song
do
sound better.
how it syncs up with everything too? That's
Well,
how
we
those
play
work.
everything to a click. Everybody's
Oh,
got in-ear
nice. Yeah,
monitors with
yeah,
a click.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like I
yeah.
have every single backing track I have set up so that there's like an 8 bar, or sorry, an eight count, like 2 bar 8 count, like song.
Yeah, that's dope. Did you ever listen to the band Ween?
Ween.
Ever get into them? Yeah.
Yeah. I like that guy's like YouTube a ton, or his Instagram shit.
Oh hell yeah, Dean Ween.
Yeah. He's a
Yeah,
fucking
yeah.
funny dude.
Oh yeah, and he's just Jersey as fuck. I'd love to have him on here one day. That would be a dream. Did you ever see the video of him on YouTube? He's fishing at Island Beach State Park with like Vice magazine or someone like that. Pretty badass. Um, but yeah, that's how they started. When like up until like their Chocolate and Cheese album, I think they didn't have a band. They just had like one of those old school rack backing track things, and it'd just be like the two guitars and them playing. And I've watched a few of those shows and they still rip.
Dude, if you put on a good show, like right now, we don't have a fucking bass player, so I have the bass in the backing tracks. If you put on a good enough show, nobody gives a shit if,
Sure.
things are being backtracked. I watched one of my buddies, he moved down to Nashville and he was playing for a pretty big, like, you know, girl who does like Paramore pop punky type stuff, who was blowing up on TikTok. And he was her touring drummer. And it was, you know, if you listen to her songs, she's got three guitars, synths, bass, vocals, two guitars, lead rhythms, multiple, all this shit. It was just her, one guitar player, and the drummer live. Not a single, I watched them play a sold out show at Irving Plaza. Not a single kid gave a shit.
Yeah. I mean, they're there to feel the music and, you know, that the level of technology we have with that too. It's not like these things even sound like the ones that Ween was using were pretty
Well, he was using like
lo-fi.
old school looping pedals, that shit's tough.
Yeah. Well, they had those, but they also had like one of those drum, like rack drum things that has like no screen, and you have to like one of those like I don't could have been a Sony thing where you have to like program it all in with like a 1, 2, 3, 4 button or whatever. I forget the name of it, but yeah, that and the loopers. The looping pedals are tricky too. I mean,
Dude, that was what's his name? The guy who taught us guitar, Carlos's big thing. He
Carlos.
was huge
Yeah,
on looping pedals, and I couldn't make them work for me. Maybe I'm not good enough. I don't know. I couldn't make that shit work for me.
yeah. I I can't either. I actually got rid of one, and I need one now because like so I'm gonna get one of those cheap Amazon ones because I'm doing everything myself, especially with tracking guitars. I need a looping pedal so that I can play something. I need to put it in the front of my chain so that I can adjust the pedals, like to adjust the knobs, right? Because I can't sit there and play and like make sure that the gain is correct, you know. So I actually have to buy one just for that utility. But yeah, they're I don't know, they're tricky. But Carlos was into that. He had a crazy setup too.
He was
Like
big
he
on the
had
MIDI guitar thing. Yeah,
yeah
that guy was talented on another level, and that you find that that's why those kind of guys end up getting picked up by somebody like David Bowie because he you know he knows that kid is better than him at guitar, so why not put him on guitar?
yeah the MIDI guitar, even just regular guitar when he was playing, he had like one of those alembic guitars, which is those things are crazy, and the Line 6 stuff. He's the first person I saw that was really using like the Line 6 rack gear back in the day. Um,
Yeah, and that was like 2010. He was using the line. I mean, I don't know. That was I, I don't love the Line 6 stuff, but like they were doing a lot of the stuff that people want to buy, like the Presonus and the Kemper stuff for 10 years
yeah,
ago.
I mean the Kemper stuff is really I've looked at that myself and I don't know. My style just doesn't play into that as much, but like it could someday. Who knows?
The thing with that stuff and all the amp modeling things, it's just it's the same thing as the backing tracks and the roll-in loops and all that stuff. It's you can pre-program the way your guitar is going to sound in every venue before you leave
Mm-hmm.
on tour. And so you don't have to worry that the profile you're playing an orange rocker verb through a Mesa Boogie is going to sound like that in every single venue, regardless of how good or bad the front of house sound guy is that works the place,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of how big the room is and whether or not you put the fucking SM57 or the Sennheiser 421 on the right axis coming in at the speaker cone. Like, none of that shit matters. It's just going to sound the way you want it to sound out of the PA. And that's the benefit of that stuff.
Totally. Yeah, and if you're playing, especially if you're playing different venues, it's nice too because you can adjust it on the fly. You could be like, I'm at an arena tonight, so I actually want to swap it out a little bit,
Yeah.
right? Or I'm playing at Irving Plaza. Um, yeah. You guys, have you? So last time we talked, we were talking about your approach to live music, which was to do these like targeted shows at different locations. Do you still stand by that?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that touring came back in such a big way after COVID. Like, everybody was just clamoring for it on a different, kind of scale than they were prior. Um, I still think it behooves you as a local band to be very picky and choosy with the shows you play. Like, I don't think it makes sense to say yes to every single. You're not going to ever grow your target audience if you're playing to, you know, some bar in Asbury Park to 10 people at, on a fucking Sunday. You're just not. Um, I do think that, prior to COVID, there was a bigger push for a lot of artists because they weren't seeing the kind of returns on the tours that they were doing, you know, to do more targeted tours in the markets that they were the most popular in. And their hardcore fans, if you were like from fucking Alabama or something, would still fly to Charleston to watch you play or whatever, or drive there or whatever. Um, and so circa 2018, 2019, everybody was all these like touring agencies and touring managers were really trying to like hone in on maximizing, it, because it made sense to go play at, say, Madison Square Garden once than it did to do an East Coast tour if you could pull that off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's kind of pulled back now because everybody is just making so much money touring right now because everybody, all the kids are just coming out to tours constantly, especially if you could price them right and not get like gouged by Ticketmaster somehow. If you're still rocking like $20-$30 tickets, people are going to come if you have some kind of draw. And I think that, you really just got to, unfortunately, it comes down to like this dollars and cents game, right? You got to really do the math and try to figure out like what makes sense for you as an artist, what venues make sense for you to play, and then where is your target audience and how many shows a year do you need to play for, A, to feel like you're playing live shows, and B, to sustain your career as a musician.
Folks have been applying in terms of even how to make those shows more appealing, like we're talking about, right? With Pixies and Modest Mouse together. Like those types of shows, I feel like those combos, they've been really choosing openers and headliners and co-headliners very wisely, at least for a lot of artists I listen to, where I'm like, I have to go and see this. Like I think like Wu-Tang and Nas last year. I almost went, but I didn't. I
That'd be
couldn't
a good
like
show.
pull it off.
And then you got like Nas
Yeah,
on the fucking, what was it, Illmatic 25th last year. So like he was probably touring on that
sure.
record, and
Yeah, yeah, and it's like why in Brooklyn. So that was the show, but I just couldn't make it out any of those nights. But it's like for that, like it's like
yeah,
that was
they're
when
smart
that was the
about it.
first one where I was like, holy shit, they're coming out with their guns blazing. Like they
Yeah,
want you there, you
yeah.
know.
And like now, I mean, you work for Spotify, you see this shit. The amount of
Hmm.
data that you guys have on like the localization of where people's targeted audiences are, and like the data you're giving indie artists now is not new to major label people. They've always had, since like the 80s, they've had that kind of like, um, kind of geographical data of where their fan bases are. But for indie artists, it's kind of like eye opening. And so that's where a lot of the targeted show things came prior to COVID, right? Like you would look at your Spotify demographics and you'd be like, shit, all right, I'm from New York, but my main audience is in Chicago. So like, why don't I just go fly to Chicago, play fucking 3 days there, and then I'm good for the month? That makes more sense than trying to grind a bunch of, Jersey to Massachusetts tours where I'm going to play to 50 people.
The one thing Spotify does offer, which I think everybody kind of has access to view, also is the artists that your fans also like,
Yeah.
which could be leveraged in that way too. It would be cool if you could filter that by locality. So if you wanted to say, like, all right, we're going to Chicago.
That's actually a very good fucking idea, because right now my big problem, especially with a lot of the shows my band gets put on, we get put on because we're a bigger band in the New Jersey, New York, Connecticut area. And so when national touring bands come through, they're like, oh shit, we're going to put Northvale on the Jersey date because they'll draw out the Jersey date. But they're not coming on the
Mm-hmm.
whole tour with us. They're just going to open at the Jersey date. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what you're saying, but
Yeah, it is.
that doesn't
Yeah.
exist at scale.
Yeah, like it's not handed to them potentially. They have to kind of manually vet out that, which could be pretty cool. And I like what you said as well, which, like, I was thinking of it like small band plus small band. Like, hey, we're planning on going somewhere. Fans also end up liking us in Chicago. Who are the bands that they also listen to there? But the opposite is true too for a big band looking for openers, which could be really cool, and to expose them from that local perspective.
Because right now, that's honestly on all streaming services, whether it be Spotify, Apple, Tidal, whatever, is the algorithms kind of, you still have to do work as a user. It's not gonna feed me new music. It's just kind of like it's that dopamine loop that like YouTube has been relying on forever. They're like, oh shit, this guy likes this band. I'm only gonna feed him shit that he likes because he likes that band, and so it's just gonna pull from the. I like Modest Mouse. I'm only gonna tell you about bands that Modest Mouse sounds like in your release radar, kind of thing. And it's a very like, or at least it's felt like this in the past few years, where it's not feeding me as many new artists that don't have them. Like, I wanna be in the trenches. Give me the kids who have like fucking 10,000 plays. Don't give me,
Right.
like, okay, let's not divvy too far from the course and get weird with it. We're just gonna give them, the next popular band on the list here.
I agree. I think that we are definitely in the minority with that, but we're like the power users at this point.
That too, and I always take my own opinions with a grain of salt, because I know that the way I'm consuming music is not the way most people do. Like, I did a panel um, on Dolby Atmos mixing when it came out, and all the other engineers on the panel were all telling me about how, like, you gotta make sure your stuff sounds good in speakers and blah blah blah. And I'm like, yes, you should check your shit on speakers, but 99% of the people who are consuming Dolby Atmos music are Apple Music users who are listening on headphones. So I think you're doing 99% of people a disservice if you're not listening to your shit on headphones as like a final check at the very least.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of, even for my, like, as we're having this discussion, it's a hard thing for me to actively kind of filter myself and try to imagine how the average person and the John Does and Jane Smiths of the world are listening to music, because most people are not digging as deep as we are. They're just doing it as a passive activity, right? And so, I always have to try to remind myself, like, okay, how are 99% of people listening to music? Because that's the people I want to make music for, because they're the gigantic portion of the market. Us 1% fucking nerdy engineers who have a surround sound system in their living room and fucking,
Yeah.
and like dig
Yeah,
through
yeah.
shit to make sure that like I like these bands and like organize my like, Spotify playlist. We're the minority. We're the fucking
Oh,
minority for
totally.
sure.
Yeah. Totally. And I mean, I just want to say that that's why I like having that's what this conversation's all about, right? Like even from me, from the like I don't even have that, right? Like I only my speaker setup is only Oratones. Like I only like even just for pleasure, I listen to my music on
The
Oratones,
fuck
right?
is wrong with
And
you?
that's just like I don't know. I like it, right? Like I have them, and I had my other like whatever Genelecs, and I never used them. I just like the thinness of the Oratones, and
Yeah,
that's
you
what
know
I
what?
mix on, and that's what I listen to.
But that's the thing. It's like it's really hard to like be in a studio or whatever and like making music. And I think it is a skill to sort of be able to understand that what you're doing is not for the 1% of music nerds, and
Hmm.
that it, but some genres are, right? Like, like, and they're very successful at it, right? Like we were talking about A Perfect Circle before, like that's a music nerds band, but they're
Sure.
also very successful at, bridging that gap to the other 99% of people. There's a lot of bands like that, like, Between the Buried and Me, music nerd band, but they have mainstream appeal. And so I think those are the bands I respect a ton. It's because like they take that mentality of we're going to be fucking nerds the whole way down, all the way down. But if the other 99% picks up on it because we're going to have some amount of pop sensibility and some amount of like, taking into account the way that pop music is created and bringing that into these subgenres, I think that's kind of an impressive skill to have.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing that I see happening actually less now, and that could be partially why we see. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a question that's gonna go down a different rabbit hole, but we should be able to come back to this too. Think of it in the context of
All
that,
right.
right? But like, there's this like rise of legacy catalog, right? And you're like in the weeds of that, right, with the
Yeah.
Atmos stuff. But like, I wonder a lot why. Why is legacy music taking more and more of a piece of the pie? Is it just that it's a function of time, right? Like that as people go, like it's like you have to listen to the Beatles. Like you can't just like come out of like a void and not go back and listen to some stuff that's come out. You don't have to, but like why wouldn't you if it's there? So like just the fact that it's there means that it'll be listened to, but it's definitely taking up attention. But at the same point, you can also go back if you get really into like one of these weird niches. You can go back and see where it came from and like how it evolved. So you're not always necessarily listening to something as it came out. But then there's also the element of technology becoming more accessible, right? And some of those bands that were, or groups, whatever, not just bands, but some of these more fringe acts were still being given late, like significant, even indie or major label attention and producer ears, not production necessarily, but producer in the traditional sense, right? Like somebody was giving them a very professional review. I think of like even Nevermind the Bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols, right? Like I forget who recorded that album, but it was a very commercially recorded album by a very fringe band, right? Like you don't see that as much now from the majors.
Yeah. So
Um,
we got a lot to unpack here.
I know
So,
that's how I roll, Mike. Now I'm gonna not talk. I'm not gonna talk for about a half hour. Just let it rip, you know.
so you got a lot of things there. So the easiest one to tackle would be the last point you made about how the major labels used to give artists a chance to grow and experiment. And I think that's a big thing that we've lost today. Right now, if you get a major label deal, you're getting a deal for like 3 or 4 singles, maybe, right? And they're hoping one of those 3 or 4 singles stick. And a lot of that is also just due to like popularity on social media. For every Tate McRae you got 35 fucking TikTok burnouts that don't succeed. And it's a tough line to walk, because you're not really calling them a burnout's mean, but like and you give.
Sure, it's not the artist that's a burnout, it's the investment,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and so yeah, and sometimes it hits, but most of the time it doesn't. And back in the day, my favorite example of this is the band Kansas.
Mm. I don't know much about them.
What record do you think had all of their big hits on it? Like, what record in their career do you think "Carry On My Wayward Son" came out?
Like which number?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have no idea. They're third.
Four. They wrote four fucking records before they had a mainstream hit. Four full-length albums before they got a fucking mainstream hit. And no major label is going to give you that patience or time today. You got fucking 3 songs to make me a hit. Otherwise, you're gone. See ya. Next. We'll find another 18-year-old kid who's got 5 million followers on TikTok. And so I think that's a big issue in regards to, letting people try and experiment and, figure out what works and what doesn't work, how to grow and evolve as an artist. Like you see people like Taylor Swift who what is she, like 11 albums into her career now, and she's constantly making tackling a different genre of music. Now she's extremely pop, but she started off alt country kind of, and but she had that time, and because she was so successful early on, to like kind of figure out what kind of sonic environment she wanted to live in. That kind of freedom doesn't get afforded to a lot of younger artists. And so I think it behooves a lot of younger artists to kind of stay in the indie scene until they have the power to come to a major label and be like, okay, this is who because all a major label is essentially is a bank with a marketing team.
Mm-hmm.
They're just giving you a blank check and a marketing and ad team to push your shit. So until you
and I guess a network, right?
Too. Yeah. Well, that's what the marketing team is, right? Like,
sure,
you can't fucking put your song in Pitchfork. No one's gonna write about your song on fucking BuzzFeed, but somebody at Sony can get the ear of one of those editors, and now it's worth your time to go there. But I think that's one step of it. And then you also have the other aspect. Why are legacy artists popping off the way they are these days? I think it's largely due to, it is a factor of time. It's also, music in general. It's like film, video games, TV. Like, how many people in your friend circle, everybody's got one who's like a fucking movie buff or like a video game nerd or whatever. We're talking, I'm trying, when I'm talking about stuff, I'm talking about like the 99% of people who casually listen to music versus the 1% of music nerds. I think there's a lot more crossover there than people would like to admit. There's a lot of, like, even just in college with us, like, we were the music tech kids, but there was a ton of fucking kids at Stevens that were very into music. They just had no desire to chase it professionally. And so, I think a lot of people, if you give a shit at all about music, are going to try and go back and trace those roots, right? Where you're going to go back and be like, okay, fuck, I like, Blink 182. Why do I like Blink 182? Like, let's go listen to the fucking Misfits or whatever, or let's go
Hmm.
listen to the Offspring and 311, and then we'll go back to the Misfits, and then we'll go back to, and then you wind up at Cheap Trick, and you're like, oh, why the fuck am I at Cheap Trick now? Let's go back further. Oh, suddenly you're at fucking Revolver, and you're listening to the Beatles, and, there you are. And the lineage just, if you just start to trace it a little bit, you see how it's all a direct, evolution from, everybody's roots. And I don't think that that's a niche thing that a lot of people do. I think I got tons of friends I can call up who are hip hop heads who are like, oh, like, why do okay, let's talk about why you like, I don't know, fucking Lil Yachty. Like, let's go back and,
Yeah.
eventually you're going to wind up at the fucking Wu-Tang Clan. And,
Yeah. No. That's exactly it. That was the one point I was trying to make. I agree with that. I don't think that it's like music is worse by any means now. I think
no,
it's just if you appreciate and look up to an artist too, you want to know where they came from, and by definition, there's somebody that came before them.
yeah.
They listened to something.
Yeah, nobody's making this shit in a vacuum. So like
Mhm.
everybody's gonna eventually have an influence that you can like statically trace from point A to B. You can be like, okay, clearly, this, fucking I don't know off the top of my head, but like, it's clearly artist A is influenced by artist B, and it's very apparent. And like, there's just so much information online that you don't even have to like listen to the stuff and make those kind of subjective judgments yourself. You can just go read their fucking Wikipedia page, and it'll probably link you to some interview where the guy tells you exactly who he's influenced by.
Yeah. I mean, I think about it with when I got into Bob Dylan, which wasn't when we were like in college. I was not into that, right? Like it was after college. Even with him, right? Like it's like 60 years later or whatever. And you're like listening to him and he's like, I was influenced by Woody Guthrie. And it's like, all right, well, let's like buy his shit on iTunes and check it out. That's what he liked. Let me check it out. And you just keep going back until, if you're a real nerd, you just keep going back until you hit the freaking Ediphone, and then you turn around and start at the beginning again.
And you're like, why do I have all these wax cylinders in my garage? And
Exactly. I literally like went to the Thomas Edison Museum. Have you been there before,
I
by
have
the way?
not. No,
Yeah, we should take a field trip one time.
is it good? Is it worth
Uh,
worth going to?
it's absolutely worth going to. They have the original studio where he was recording all the artists back there intact. You can't like walk through it, but they have pianos and stuff. And then they have this whole like museum area right outside of it that has like record players and like prototypes of the early record players that go like from there to like radios. So as a music professional, it's really I don't know, it's cool to like go there and think about where it all came from to some degree, right? Cuz like that's it. Before that, like music is older, right, than conversation. If you go back and
Yeah.
you look it up, like music and dance predate speech and language. Yet the music industry is only like 150 years old in terms of recorded music, but it existed before that.
Yeah.
It's not like even with AI, right, which we haven't even touched upon,
Oof.
but we should. But like, perhaps in another time as well we could. But the people are going to listen to music because it existed before people were making money off of it. They just do it because they like to.
I think eventually what ends up happening too in the era of recorded music is eventually you go so far back that the shit becomes unlistenable from like a fidelity standpoint, right?
Hmm.
Like personally, I'm never going to listen to anything recorded before 1950s, whenever that transition from like, mono to stereo is, because they just don't sound good. Like you were pretty much at that point tracking directly into a metal plate that you were using as your mother stamper for the vinyl, releases. And it's like, okay, look, from a historical standpoint, yeah, I'll listen to it once, but I'm not going to like revisit this over and over again and like, throw this on my fucking playlist. you know. So eventually you're going to hit, no matter how far back you go, you're going to hit a fidelity standpoint as a listener from whatever genre you're into, where you're like, this is just unlistenable now and I'm out. But you could still appreciate it. And you're right. Like music's been going on forever and ever and ever. And like you could trace this lineage back to, fucking, early civilization. If you really wanted to be a nerd about it, you could absolutely trace Blink 182 back to fucking, early civilization. Somehow, some way you can
You
get there.
can. You can go Blink 182, flogging Molly, Irish people playing songs on the street,
Yeah, yeah, you
that'll
could
get you
do it.
back before recording,
Yeah. But the whole AI thing with AI, I think that at least from what I've been seeing coming out, and we're pitched relatively often because we're at a major label, and I just assume that the stuff is, being pitched to us and the other engineers that are working at major labels first. But like the tools they're pitching aren't, they're not going to replace anybody, like there's certain things that are time savers. And yeah, if you're like a fucking assistant engineer, or something that's like totally doing support stuff, I think, yeah, you might want to figure out another way to make yourself valuable. But like, it's all just stuff to make my job faster right now is really, essentially, it's very capitalist. It's very like, how do we make this shit more efficient is really the tools I see coming out. It's a lot of like stem separation software, and like, you put in a chord and it'll arpeggiate it and make and it can add a fucking drum beat underneath it. So like from like early songwriting process, it's a lot faster now to get ideas down than it is to like, sit there and record everything from scratch, especially. But like people were doing that shit in GarageBand with loops years ago. It's not like it's any different. It's just a little less technical. So
Exactly. I agree. I've seen the same thing from code at this point, and I play with this stuff quite a lot at work, like for my day to day. And you end up wasting the same amount of time. Like even with the assistant example, like I foresee at least for a few years, maybe it's only 5, who knows, but those jobs are just going to be someone twiddling with
yeah, AI software, yeah,
or
or whatever.
fiddling whatever with AI software, because you have to talk to it and be like, no, this is incorrect.
Look, if AI mastering was going to put me out of a job, it would have done it already, because AI mastering has been around probably longer than anything else at this point. That was the first thing they tried to do, was AI mastering
It
stuff.
definitely was.
Like, I really wish, you know, that AI would be a little more practical and less like broad strokes kind of shit. Because yeah, I would love to be able to like drop a Pro Tools session in and have it, you know, I don't know, clean up all the noise, just
Yeah.
trim all the fucking sound files, because I have to go in and manually do that right now. I have to go, even when I'm remixing shit from tape, I have to like go in and manually fucking cut out all the fucking tape hiss, or add noise gates. And like, I just don't love the way noise gates sound relative to manually cutting all the shit out. It just sounds better to actually manually cut all the shit out, so I do it. But
I, for the podcast, even run into issues where I'm like, I should be noise gating the whole thing, but it's just easier for me to sit there and use a marquee tool
yeah,
and sit for 1 hour and
yeah,
or whatever. I play it with the vary speed, right? And just because otherwise the noise gate, it's the same problem as the AI. It'll be like cutting off like part of people's voice and stuff,
yeah.
and you have to fiddle with that anyway.
You could set it,
But yeah,
perfectly for one instrument, and then you listen to the song and you're like, okay, this works. And then you listen back and you're like, oh god damn it, it fucking clamped down too fast over here at minute,
yeah,
at 122, and you're like, god damn it. So it ends up just being faster to go in and trim everything manually, which whatever.
yeah. I can't get around it. With the podcast is a big problem with that because, like I said, it's like 2 hours. And I'm trying to do video now, and those are not in Logic anymore. They're in Final Cut or DaVinci, which is I'm an audio engineer. That I learned that through this process. Like there's too many mouse clicks that I have to do in the video software.
I mean, Pro Tools still has the video engine, right? Or I mean, not that I've
You
used
can't
it
do
in years.
multicam, I don't think.
Oh no.
I don't think you could do a multicam edit. So like if I have the two like R2 videos and I want to cut between the two, it gets kind of weird. I should look and see though. Logic doesn't let you do that. Maybe Pro Tools does, and if it does, I should use it because I just don't think in terms of video. I probably should use a video editing software honestly and just learn it, but
But the issue with the video editing software is they don't have all the fucking plugins for audio.
so what I started to notice was, and this goes back to this is full circle with the recording stuff that we were talking about. I was definitely over engineering the audio just because I could, and it wasn't really taking me that much time. But like in Final Cut, by the time you're done with it, you're just like, okay, what do they got? They got like one compressor with like a knob. Let me just, do that. I'll do a quick EQ, cut out like, up to 60 hertz. Magic audio, we're done. I haven't listened to too many of these video ones yet, though. Like, historically, we'll see, because they always sound fine after you release them.
Yeah.
Like a year down the line, I'll listen and see.
Yeah, that over engineering thing is a thing that I've kind of had a change of heart on recently because I've been going back and like revisiting so many of these, kind of like bringing it full circle entirely to the Steve Albini conversation. Like when I get these track sheets in and I see these like iconic records that I love so much and they're done with 24 tracks onto tape and the engineer notates exactly what he or she used in their signal flow, and it's not that fucking complicated. There's only so many tools that an audio engineer really has at their fingertips, right? You've got EQs, compressors, limiters, and maybe you can do some mid-side type stuff and like, stereo expansion type stuff with new plugins, but it's not that many tools. It's just, and you're reading these track sheets and you're like, holy shit, like the vocal chain on this record that I love so much is 3 plugins or 3 pieces of equipment to recreate it. And that's really this has honestly been a revelation I've had in the past like 3 or 4 years. I'm like, man, I am like over engineering these sessions. I don't have to do any of this stuff to get the same kind of sound. Like, but if you were a 18-year-old kid starting out right now and you just type in YouTube, how to compress a vocal, I bet you the first hit is not going to be a reputable engineer telling you how to do that. It's going to be whoever was able to game the YouTube algorithm to get the most plays. And most of the time, that person has never made a record.
Yeah. Or they're not making records anymore and they're just making YouTube videos, and they made a few records before, but now they're making YouTube videos, so they might be biased. I had the same revelation. A big one for me was with EQ, where it was like, why do I need to see my EQ? Like, nobody was looking at this before there was a graphical EQ to look at. Like, not a graphic EQ, like a UI for the EQ.
Yeah,
like
they were dialing it by ear. Yeah.
Yeah, and like to me, that was almost a revelation in terms of like looking up tabs, right? Like when you're playing guitar with someone who's new, and you're like, dude, just like trust me on this. You're gonna save yourself like 5 fucking years if you don't use tabs. Like, just stop, just slide until you hear the note. Like EQ is the same way for me, and I do go in if there's something like a weird hum or whatever, and I'm sure you have to use this at a mastering level for sure, right? For things like that. But if you're just trying to color something at the tracking stage or like just getting a mix out, you're doing a disservice, I feel like, if you're trying to apply these YouTube style, like every vocal track needs to come in, like apply this arc here, and like it's just not.
Well, yeah, I have a good friend of mine recorded like an EP of his, and it was a pet project, and he knew it was a pet project. It was like it was very much he just wanted to put out a record to say he put out a record, and he went through and did exactly this. He like pulled up all this stuff to like match all of the you know compression and EQ chains of records he liked. So he was like, he sent me the fucking mix V1 or whatever, and I was like, dude, you got to go back and compress the vocal more. He's like, what do you mean I got to compress the vocal more? I compressed. I have 3 compressors on this, because I'm copying the Paramore vocal chain from this YouTube video that somebody posted.
Sure.
And I'm like, I don't care how many compressors you have on it. Use one with a fucking lower threshold so it compresses it more. Like, what's a compressor doing? It's squashing the signal based on a fucking threshold to make it consistent across the board and then raising the gain to wherever you want it to be so that there's less dynamics in it. Why the fuck do you need like multiple of them to do the same thing that one could do? Just compress it. I don't care what, whose YouTube tutorial you followed. Just, do it to ear and make it sound right.
I've gone down that rabbit hole a lot and then come out. And again, the Steve Albini type stuff also snaps me out of reality when I'm just like, even when they were like whatever I'm fucking doing, like they weren't doing that for Led Zeppelin 4 and it sounds just fine. Like they were just using like, some outboard compressor. They didn't have like a graph that they're looking at with it too.
Yeah, a lot of those guys in the early like 70s and stuff who became audio engineers, like Vlado Meller is a great example. He's like one of these like legendary mastering engineers who like has done everything from like Red Hot Chili Peppers to Kanye and like all this, massive fucking records. The dude was like, I don't know if he's from like Ukraine or Russia or something, but he was like an electrical engineer over in like, some Eastern European country, and he came over here and he like one of the guys that he knew that from his neighborhood was like, hey, I've got an opening if you want to be an audio engineer over at CBS. But like he came in as an electrical engineer from Eastern Europe, and a lot of the guys
cool.
that like came up in the 70s and shit, they didn't get trained as audio engineers, and so they have a different like kind of viewpoint on a lot of this stuff. And a lot of them were like, it's the same like Steve Albini philosophy where it's like, why wouldn't you do something like compress a vocal coming in when you're going to have to compress it eventually? Why wouldn't you try to keep some of that fidelity by compressing it on the way in rather than trying to fix it on the back end? Like, you're going to have to like, you don't want the peaks and valleys on a lead vocal. You just don't. You want it to be consistent across the board if you're making a pop sensible song.
Yeah. And then just don't over and compress it.
Yeah, but
like you don't have to like hard it. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's very much thinking about it from like an electrical engineering standpoint, like thinking about how the signal is going to get processed onto the tape. Whereas like in the audio engineering world, it's really easy to get lost in the sauce. You can really, just not think about fundamentals at all and still make a good sounding record because you just have so many good sounding tools at your disposal now.
Yeah, this makes sense. It's the same way in software engineering, to be honest. Like, you can spin your wheels all day with all the fancy new stuff, and you have to, right? Like, just to be creative and to keep things fresh. But I guess a good example, too, not even from audio, is like, Super Mario Brothers still freaking kicks ass compared to New Game, right? It stands up next to it.
Yeah.
And they were using way more primitive shit, but they were focused on the right things and just doing what they had to with those tools. And I'll bring it full circle again. Now you know why I open up all these threads, right? They give us like a place to dance between, right? But like there is something to legacy stuff in that sense too, because those things it's not that they are necessarily better. I think there's going to be an AI Radiohead, right? There's going to be acts that use what they have at their disposal now in a super creative way. And there were people that did that in the past. And just because they were using outdated shit didn't mean that what they did sounded good. Good sounds good, right?
Yeah.
To a certain degree, right? You're right. I think this is really interesting because you pointed out something about that wall that you hit, right? Like with the 1950s. For me, it's a little earlier actually, but that's just my own
Yeah, it's everybody's going to hit a
Sonic.
wall the further back you go. Eventually, it's just
What's
not.
the yeah? What do they call it with whiskey or whatever when you like get your acquired taste, right? I've
Yeah, yeah.
acquired that 1950s a little bit, but for me, it's like pre World War One. Like once they
Back.
started, yeah, because I listened to all those old like blues records, right? But once they started putting them on actual like 78s, you could hear a drastic difference in a similar way that you're talking about from when they started using stereo to mono. And then you have it again from 8 track to more, you know.
Yeah,
You hit that in the 60s too. If you like a lot of tracks, you're going to listen to something like Jimi Hendrix and be like, only has like 4 things going on,
yeah.
right?
Those are my favorite, though. By the way, when they're like, we need to like, I didn't personally do this one, but like all these like audiophile dudes online love the kind of blue, like Atmos mix that my
Mm.
colleague Mark Wilder did, and it's great. He's an incredible engineer, and he did a good job on it. But I'm like, how the fuck did you make an Atmos mix? It's a 3-track tape, dude. What the hell are you like? There was only ever 3 tracks, like
Yeah.
and he just did careful fucking like EQ and panning and like splitting the signal to different like frequency spectrums. Like he really like he made an LFE channel by just summing them and like cutting the bass off at 100 hertz kind of thing and putting that in its own channel. And he got super creative with it. But I'm like, man, you had 3 tracks. You were really pulling a rabbit out of your hat here. Like,
I want to check that out actually. Like that is interesting. Cuz you probably well that's art there though. That's engineering art, right? Cuz you're dealing with a limitation in one area and you have to make up for it some other way, right?
yeah, yeah, because there's and that's a lot of that stuff. It's like what I don't want to say what year Kind of Blue came out off the top of my head because I don't know, but I'm assuming it was.
It was the 50s, right? 59,
Yeah, if it was
something like that.
3-track tape, it had to be early '60s, late '50s. So it was like that's all you had.
1959.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so you were pigeonholed into that at that point, and that's all you had. And so you gave 1 track to Miles for his trumpet, and then you probably put everything else stereo left and right and called it a day. And that's probably how they mixed the whole fucking record. And to do an Atmos mix now where you have to fill 12 channels of shit, I don't know how you do that, but Mark pulled the rabbit out of his hat there with that one.
But he's dealing with like the thing with Kind of Blue, that's a perfect example, right? Cuz that album still is a masterpiece
Yeah,
even though it only had 3 tracks.
yeah,
Right? And when people have 500 tracks, it still will be a masterpiece, right? Well, we have 500 tracks now. When you have AI writing, you could like have Travis Barker playing drums and like, Bob Dylan writing lyrics to your own version of like some kind of Blink 182 or whatever you want to do. There will be genius work that comes from that, but there's still going to be genius work that came without it. People still read the Iliad, you know?
yeah, yeah. I'm not scared of the future. These new AI tools do not like frighten me. I don't feel like I'm going to get put out of a job due to them. You know, it's just changing the way I have to work currently. And the only thing I will say that I'm a little scared of with the AI stuff is I feel like it's going to pull, and this might tie into the whole legacy artist thing. It might pull the fucking ladder up in a sense for like big famous people now, because I just think they're gonna try and rehash already successful people that they own the rights of the music to. And I
Hmm.
don't think that's due to the major labels. I think that's due to all these venture capitalist firms that are buying up catalogs now because they own everything outright. They don't share anything with the estate or the artist. They just, when they buy Bob Dylan's estate, they own it all. They own his likeness and they can put his shit into anything they want. If they want to train a fucking language learning model on his voice and, you know, make new records with his voice, he can't say no, or his estate can't say no when he dies. So, um, that concerns me a little. I think there's going to be a little less room for new artists to break in because they're going to have to compete now with a new Bob Dylan record that they wouldn't have had to compete with, 20 years ago. But we'll see how that shakes out, I guess. But from an engineering standpoint, I'm not super scared.
I agree. I think, especially from an engineering perspective, I think about this from an artist perspective. I worry about it, but also I have faith in the children. And like, I just think of myself as a kid, and like, I didn't even want to listen to the old Dylan records until I went far enough down the line, right? So it's like, there still is always like, the youth wants their own voice,
I think that's going to be the
typically. So,
saving grace. You're right. That's the saving grace there is that I think that, Gen Alpha or whatever is going to reject not, having their own shit. They're going to want to put their stamp on the art somehow and
yeah,
not just rehash a Prince record because there's a new Prince record kind of thing. Even if, you got to go up against the massive marketing machine, you know.
yeah. And I mean, it'll always be there, though. I think we've actually aged ourselves too into a different market now. Like we certainly have, right? But
Yeah.
like the legacy market is just for the youth. I know that they also are listening to a lot of older music now, way more than they possibly would have before. But I mean, it's no different actually, probably than it was for us than the download era. You could download
Yeah.
all of AC. I remember downloading all of AC/DC's music.
I've just recently gotten into ACDC's catalog, and had no idea how dense and deep it was.
Yeah, it is.
They're another one, like fucking Back in Black. What is that? Their fucking like 10th record that had all those hits on it, like Thunderstruck. Like that's another one. Like,
It is. I knew a few AC/DC fans. I never like they do have some diehards.
dude,
I
they
haven't
are
gone
they're
deep.
gigantic, and I had no idea how
Yeah.
big they were until very recently. But they are. I think it's Sony. I think I've told you this fact before that Thunderstruck is the most expensive song to license from Sony,
Yeah, I
which,
think you did. Yeah.
but there I think are like, and don't quote me on this, but they're definitely in the top 10 earning
Wow.
artists for the label. Like
That's
period,
wild.
even versus new artists, it's like, versus Beyonce, versus Adele, like no, ACDC is in that list. So
Hey, they're rocking. I never like I said, I know, you know, 50 songs by them maybe. Maybe more than average, but I don't know like their albums like the back of my hand or anything like that. You guys got the album coming out, right, for Northvale,
we got an album coming out. That should be
single by single.
we're gonna do at least, and I hate saying this, but we're gonna do at least 4 singles off of it, and you know, it's just that's the game. That's how you have
Yeah.
to play the streaming game right now, and it's a different model than just dropping songs, but I think it does make the listeners. It's a double edged sword, right? Like the listeners have to go in and they get fed one song at a time, so it makes them deep dive onto individual songs more. But then when the album comes out, there's like less surprises. It's like, well, I fucking heard half this album already.
I like it. I could tell you from my experience, I've been doing a lot of Like, I think one thing I've really leveled up on from this podcast that I didn't really expect, but people have kind of really lined up to want to share their music on here, and I embrace that. But it's given me, like, required me to do this, like, almost like an A&R kind of thing, where I have to, like, listen to an artist, like, before I have them on, just to give them the service of that and have a good conversation. But breaking an artist through, right, and like unlocking them, I do appreciate when I know the songs on the album, and we all have done that in the past, right? Even off the radio, right? You know a couple of the songs, and they kind of become your milestones when you're listening, and you balance, like, maybe you go to that song and then you listen to the next one again, and then, like, you listen to the next song and unlock like a little patch of the album. It's useful.
I mean, for
My
me
biggest
personally,
problem. Oh,
yeah,
go
I
ahead.
like it, but I have heard a fair amount of complaints from people where they're like, "Well, I've heard the whole record already. What, great. There's two more songs
Yeah,
on it. Sick."
if
But
if it's the whole record, I agree. Like 4 songs, I think is fair.
I
Four
think
singles is good.
4 or 5 seems to be the sweet spot, especially if you have another 5 or 6 to put in there. As long as those other 5, 6 aren't fucking throwaways, because I
Yeah,
have heard albums where it's like, oh, you clearly only did this single drip out because you only had 4 strong songs, and the
sure.
rest is nonsense. But no, I'm pretty happy with the album we just made. We just did a full band listen last night and sent notes to Brett this morning, and I I'm pretty stoked on it.
Oh yeah,
It's one of those things where it's like you've been working on this one piece of art for so long. You're like, all right, let's just get it out now. But I think
yeah.
I haven't hit that wall yet where I'm like, I don't want to listen to these songs yet. So
That's good. That I've experienced in my last album, actually. Even when I go back and listen to the last thing I put out, that's how I know I'm getting actually good from my own perspective, where I listen to the whole thing and I'm like, I could still rock to this. Like, I could still go in and work on it. I have more than enough songs, but like to do something new. But if I wanted to, I could go in and like keep spinning the wheel. When you get sick of this shit, then
that's when
you're
you
like,
know
all
that
right,
that it
let's
might.
move on.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't hit that wall yet, so that's how I know we're in a good
Nice.
spot. So hopefully it plays out for us the way we want it to.
You know what you should think about with the singles that I've been telling a few people is so as I go through one. So first of all, one of the annoying things for a fan to do is if you're trying to like listen to, if you're getting into an artist, going in and cherry picking those singles is annoying. So it is nice to put them all into like a playlist or something, so they could be like, all right, here's all the Northvale songs, so I don't have to like go in Spotify and like make my own playlist. That's a bitch.
Yeah,
Um, but also something that I like on those singles too when I'm going through is the B side that people don't do anymore. You give me a demo, give me something like fun with that single that's separate than the album that makes people go back, because then after people have the album you're like, all right, so in the looking back at it, it's almost like you should just go, if you're not doing that, and delete those singles,
that's kind
because
of
it looks
interesting. I didn't
weird.
think about doing that. I didn't think anybody would care, especially on like the scale of band we are. But like I could totally release every single one of these songs with a fucking pre-pro demo. It'd be like, this is the way it was, and then
You should. Yeah, you should, because otherwise you're leaving those singles, when people go back and look at your catalog, they see it. Like, if you have different art and you have the song, the single, and then a B-side, then at least it's like an artistic move a little bit, where it's not like, here was the slow drip, I could just skip over this because that's the like 10 different boxes here that are all actually just one album,
yeah, no, that
gives you a
shit's yeah,
little.
that isn't. I mean, yeah, I see that with even some of these legacy artists that I'm doing. Like, you pull up some of their tapes, and it's like they have tons and tons of like reels where they're just trying to figure out the songs because they had like unlimited studio time, and
Mm-hmm.
then like they'll have the one reel will be like, I'm just using Rage Against the Machine, but it'll be like Rage Against the
Sure.
Machine, Killing in the Name of, and it'll be like take 1, 2, 3, and the 3 has a star next to it. And it's like, this is the one. But if you listen to
Yeah.
2 and 1, they're not like bad, and like in some of them they fucking flew in the vocals from take 1 into take 3, and like that's just a different way of making records that's kind of gone by the wayside now because you just kind of hone in so much in the singular Pro Tools or session or whatever the fuck you're recording into, and you just delete the stuff that you don't like, and you know.
I have appreciated that myself from Dylan, right? Because I'll go back and listen to every take that they put with the 50th anniversary stuff.
Those
Like I'll
box
like
sets,
go in and
dude.
listen.
I see. So that guy Mark Wilder does those with this
Yeah.
producer Steve Berkowitz. He does all like the lost, whatever they're called, the
Sure.
bootleg
Yeah.
archive sets or whatever. They're on like volume 16 now or
The
what.
bootleg series. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like there was one for, what was it, like Blood on the Tracks or whatever, and it was like fucking, like some of the songs had like 70 takes, and some of them were literally just
Yeah.
like 30 seconds long, and Bob would be like, I fucked up, start over. And like the fans wanted that, and I was like
Oh
shocked
yeah, I
about
want
that
that.
because like I
Yeah.
don't want to listen to that shit, but like the fans
Yeah.
who like Bob Dylan loved that shit.
They do. I used to be on a website that would trade that stuff that got shut down called Tangled Up in Torrents, and you would download those like one person because they used to release like before the basement tapes one, they didn't release the whole thing. Like they only released that to the 50th anniversary, and there were like 500 of them, and then somebody would upload it, and you'd get like the whole 1966. Yeah, they're cool from an engineering perspective or a songwriting perspective to
Yeah.
see how they actually decided. Um, yeah, so some of that shit you should reuse. You have some material that you can give people. I when I listen to it, I'll want to hear those. So you should consider it. Or a remix too. You could take it another way, right? And think about how they did it in the 2000s and have two people mix it
Oh,
and see
that's all
like,
back in style now, dude. That's
yeah.
all these like fucking anniversary editions that I remaster. They just tack on like 10 remixes at the end. They're like, this is
Yeah.
the 20th anniversary edition of whatever
Or the
record.
live.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they bring in like cool people to like do the remixes. Like we just did one for what was it? I mean, we did the Modest Mouse one that had a bunch of cool guys on it. Like they brought in John
Really?
Congleton to do a remix, and they brought in like
Which
MD
Modest Mouse record was it?
Good
Was it Good
News.
News or
Yeah,
oh sick.
and they brought
Nice.
in,
That's my
yeah,
favorite one.
they brought in like the dude from MGMT did a remix. Like there was a bunch
Oh
of cool
nice.
fucking. But there's another one. I forget the name of the band, but like it's like a bigger metal band, and like they brought in that band Health that's like popping off right now to do a remix,
Yeah.
and like that's cool to me. Like it was
Me
rad.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just
It's just
send them the
giving
multi-track. I'm
yeah.
like, here's the raw multi-track, go nuts.
Yeah. Even from your band's level, that shit would be cool. Um all right, man. This has been real.
It's
We
been
should do
great.
this again soon.
Hell
We
yeah.
got to stay on after this for a minute for it to upload, but yeah, I haven't addressed the listeners. If you're still listening at this point, Eros, what's up? Check out the Rich Sony podcast, like and subscribe, and much thanks. And yeah, look forward to having you subscribe or tune in rather to the next episode.